past the hour. Welcome back. So let me just lay this out for you, and you can feel free to reality check this with me. Strauss and Howe, in their book The Fourth Turning, argued that roughly every 80 years throughout American history, and they take this all the way back to the 1600s actually, but that roughly every 80 years we have a crisis followed by a war, followed by a rebooting of America, and that rebooting has historically always been in a positive and more progressive direction. They argue that the reason for this is partly that after 80 years, people forget the lessons, the hard-learned lessons that were learned 80 years previously, because the people who knew those lessons are now, so old nobody's paying attention to them or they're dead. That's part of it. And the other part of it was that there are these 4 generations. A generation is roughly 20 years, so 80 years is roughly 4 generations. So you start out with a generation, let's, for example, say the generation that experiences the Great Crash and the war. And they fight, they live through the Great Crash and they fight the war. And then they give birth to a generation that just carefully and quietly rebuilds the country. And that generation then gives birth to a generation that says, my parents worked their butts off to rebuild the country, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt. I'm going to go for self-actualization. I want to meditate. I want to take some LSD. I want to know what the world is like. I want to explore spirituality. That being that third generation, as it were. That generation then gives birth to a generation that says, okay, my parents thought they could get enlightenment, but it didn't work out that way, and, all I got is this lousy T-shirt, so I'm going to make as much money as I can. This is the 4th generation. And that 4th, basically kind of greedy generation then blows everything up with their greed, creating a new crisis, creating a new war. And this is how the 80 years goes about. I would like to add kind of Hartmann's variation on Strauss and Howe's theory. And that is that within each one of those 80-year periods, it was 80 years from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War. It was 80 years from the Civil War to the Great Depression of World War II. It's 80 years from World War II to now, roughly. That within those 80-year periods, there's actually 2 40-year pieces. And the first 40-year piece is when we actually do get more progressive. After the American Revolution, hey, it's a brand new country, and we're going to pass the Bill of Rights and do all this kind of cool stuff. And then, of course, 40 years in, which would be the 1830s, you get the rise of oligarchy in the South. The rich rise up. They try to take over. So the second half of that 80-year period is where the rich people and the big corporations basically try to take down the country. Then we had the Civil War. Then we had Reconstruction. We had a progressive period. And then, of course, there was the backlash against that, the 1896 decision that is separate but equal and all that kind of stuff. And boom, you get more conservative. Then you have a war, a crash in a war, and then you have FDR, and you get more progressive. And then you get Reagan 40 years into it in 1980, and you get more conservative. And I'm of the opinion that we are at the tail end of this 40-year period of conservative dominance of American politics. That we are in a crisis. Not we're in 4, but we are in one. We have a climate crisis. We have a gun crisis. We have a financial crisis. We have public health crises. And out of all this, I believe, is going to come a new progressive era.